I think the most obvious jumping off point here is that this is a movie about a character who we've never seen captured this way before. The story of Richard Davis and what he invented is known and has been written about, but he's such an obvious cinematic character. So, Ramin, can you talk a bit about how you discovered Richard Davis and his contributions to the bulletproof vest technology and what struck you as an opportunity to make a movie here?
It was in 2020. I was editing The White Tiger, and the producers, Johnny and Daniel from the Vespucci group, contacted me wanting to propose an idea for a fictional film about Richard Davis. They were going to make a documentary first, and then they wanted to develop a fiction film at the same time. And when I heard they wanted to make a doc, and they showed me a snippet of of Richard's own movies that he had made and the archival footage of him shooting himself. And I asked a couple more questions. How much archives do you have? And they said they had a lot of archives, and they had an 8-hour movie that Richard had made himself over time. I just thought, with the little they've just told me and with that archival, this seems like a great documentary opportunity. And so I twisted it around to them and said, how about the doc instead? And they were intrigued by that. I sent them some short docs I'd made, and they sent me a bunch of material to review. And after a couple of weeks of reviewing that, I think we both kind of shook hands and said, let's take off on making the doc version. And I was just so intrigued by this character who was so kind of braved and willing to risk everything to create this invention of the modern day bulletproof vest. That in itself was amazing as a rags to riches story. I like that he was a salesman. I've always been fascinated by salesmen, or as Joshua and I sometimes talk about, confidence men from the Melville story, Confidence Men. And also for me, Arthur Miller's interest in salesmen and in morality stories. So initially, when I had heard about it, I thought it was going to be a typical rise and fall story that had a moral center. And in a way, like Arthur Miller's All My Sons, I thought that's the direction the documentary was going to be headed. But when I went to film with Richard and other people in Michigan, the story started to evolve and take a different shape and form.
So, Josh, when did you first hear about this project from Ramin, and what did you make of its potential?
I remember Ramin telling me he was shooting his first feature documentary about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, and us speaking about it briefly. And then, but really I got engaged when Ramin sent me the first cut. And I was astonished really by, as I always am, the kind of performativity of this man. Richard is so, there's the question of how does he want to be seen? How does he see himself? And what is he willing to sacrifice in the world and in relation to truth in order to maintain that self-image for himself? And what are the costs of maintaining that performance? And of course, the performance exists in this totally kaleidoscopic, amazing archive of films he's made, dramas he's made, some of them impressive, having worked with non-actors in the act of killing to create these dramatizations of how people want to see themselves. These were sophisticated and expensive, and all of that totally fascinated me. And then Ramin's vision just kind of blew me away, and was sort of, I guess my role was really just to encourage Ramin to make the film that I think was really in his heart, and to say, there's a tension between a plot-driven story about, what Richard Davis's story, how he came to do what he did and what happened to his business. And then the broader, the sort of thematic, gorgeous, riveting essay about America is so relevant to this moment where the distortion of truth, even the wholesale loss of truth, certainly the loss of any consensus of what around how we even decide what is true, is probably the greatest threat that we face. So I think I just was blown away by the man, the material, the performativity, and then the sensitivity of Ramin's questioning. And I just encouraged him to make a film that really finds a form that honors that. And God, did Ramin ever do that?
Aaron Wickenden is the editor. He's really excellent. I mean, really, really good editor. He's working a lot with Morgan Nelville and other filmmakers. And we had all this footage. By the time I showed it, the first cut to Joshua, we had already broken it up into chapters, but I couldn't, we were struggling to figure out how to tell the story and how to focus it. And that, I think Joshua and I had a 3-hour conversation. And I think Aaron might have even gotten looped into the call halfway through. I said, hang on, let me get Aaron onto this, WhatsApp. Other than it was encouraging, which it was. And I could see very quickly what Joshua was responding to that helped me understand, okay, what's working in the film. But Joshua had a sense of guidance with the film that really helped it go in the right direction. I think by the time a couple months later, when I showed him the next cut, it was no longer about shaping it. It was more about chiseling and kind of fine tuning things. So I just found that 3-hour conversation was instrumental to the film finding itself in the edit room.
I'm also curious about the sort of expectations versus reality when it came to connecting with Richard Davis, who is somebody who obviously kind of self-mythologizes in a way. So you have your own set of questions and a desire to get deeper into his story, and he has his way of telling his story. So, how did you enter into that, knowing that you might not get everything from him that you need in order to tell the story the way that you saw it?
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens in docs. It's never what you think it's going to be. And, Richard, you can see in the movie, there's certain times when I'm pressing him to go to another place, let's say, to accept, that there was an arson, but he simply cannot do that. It's really not clear to me which of these deceptions he believes actually now, or which of them he believes for our presentation together. I'm not sure. And there were certain areas where I was hoping Richard would reveal himself in some more emotional way, which he didn't. I don't think it was that he didn't want to. I just don't think his character and mind works that way. I think there's something, extremely intelligent and inventive in Richard. He's clearly really imaginatively intelligent on what he's focused on, which is armor, weaponry, these kinds of subjects. The guy is very inventive. So then it was really turning to the people around him who would help us understand Richard and everything that he created. We had some of those people in the first round of shooting, and then some of them came in the second round. I was asking the producers to please track down and convince Richard's second wife to speak. Thank God that she did agree, because she was so deep and eloquent and was so kind of profound in her way of talking, and was such a relief to him. A relief meaning a contrast or a foil. In fact, I found Aaron Westrick's wife also very eloquent. And then we tracked down Brenda in the second round of interviews. She's the worker who has MS. And again, her way of talking and her way of seeing a part of Richard's life help us understand Richard and what he created.
Josh, I feel like there's a certain through line here with work that you've made. I mean, with Act of Killing and Look of Silence, you are similarly engaging with men who, have their own way of explaining themselves, and your work has always been about sort of piercing that and contextualizing it. So I'm curious about what sort of kinship you feel with this.
Yeah. Listening to you, Ramin, just now, I really thought about cognitive dissonance. You said this really interesting thing, that you don't know what Richard has come to, what he now believes is true. I think that question of the gap between what we believe and what we know, that precisely cognitive dissonance is what makes him so fascinating. And in The Act of Killing, of course, I chose a protagonist who I felt I could somehow, I was drawn to sort of pierce the narrative, find how he really sees himself, and have and at least find a kind of bodily experience of that beneath the narrative. I guess with many of the perpetrators, I couldn't. And in The Look of Silence, I work with a contrast between that self-presentation, cognitively dissonant, to be sure, on the one hand, and people who are speaking truth. And I really feel, thinking about your film, thinking about Second Chance, Brenda and the two, Brenda, Richard's ex-wife, Aaron's wife, the eloquence you talk about, I think is also maybe just a presence and a kind of humility in the face of certain moral horrors on whatever scale we are working with, that mean they are honest. And their honesty, in the contrast between that honesty and Richard's need, for internal need somehow to play this role, that contrast, I think, is also what somehow the architecture of the film, without giving away too much, that moment of reconciliation that sort of pierces, that you just give space to kind of shine through the kind of essay about deception and self-deception and performance, that the rest of the film and the consequences of that, and racism and dissimulated racism, all of that whole essay that the film is, then you sort of honor the honesty and the presence and the directness of some of your characters to just give space to a truly honest moment of reconciliation, in which the film kind of grounds itself morally and makes itself urgent somehow. That the truth isn't dead, that honesty and humility are not dead, that they're alive and kicking, and that there are so many people who just have no choice but to speak the truth at times, even if all of us dissemble and lie to ourselves about who we are at other times.
Yeah, finding that character Clifford was when we left the first round of shooting. And Aaron told me about the man, Aaron, the police officer, who told me about his moment when he was shot and saved by the vest, and how, of course, that changed his entire trajectory. And then he started speaking about that man, the man who had shot him. And I just turned to the producers and I said, you have to find that guy. It had always been, once I heard about that man, it was in my mind that he should come at the end of the film and not anywhere else. We shouldn't know him. We shouldn't see him. We should meet him in the end. And he should come as a surprise guest to the dinner party that changes the whole configuration of the table, and it's exactly what he ended up doing. And he was more eloquent and humble and humorous than I could have imagined he would be. So it was, and then, his meeting with Aaron was something very special.
Can I just gush also about one thing, Ramin and Eric? Sorry, Ramin, because you're obviously you're present, but you are a poet. Like Goodbye Solo and Chop Chop and moments in White Tiger 2, but the whole ending of this movie is this beautiful piece of lyric, really, that, I just, when I saw the second cut of this film, I caught my breath at the end. And it's just a beautiful work that honors all of these themes and people and lives and questions that you're talking about. I want to underscore that for a second.
Thank you.
Well, I also think it's worth pointing out. I mean, what I appreciated about this film, Ramin, is that there's a through line in so much of your work. I mean, maybe not necessarily in the same way with White Tiger, but it seems like you're often sort of dealing with the contradictions of American identity. The idea of boundless opportunity, an entrepreneurial spirit, but then at the same time there's this darker side that encroaches upon that, and the fact that it translates into the nonfiction realm with the same clarity you bring to the narratives is really remarkable to see. And I'm curious about how clearly you think about that thematic focus when you set out on a project, or if it's just sort of something that happens organically for you.
I think it's just who I am. When you stray away from who you are, you can tell in the movie. It's funny, when you said all that, I thought, wow, that still sounds like White Tiger.
It does. I almost interrupted you, Eric, to say that's White Tiger too. Yeah.
It's entrepreneurial spirit, and it goes to there's a dark side to that too. I think it's just, the same as I've read a couple of drafts of Joshua's absolutely brilliant fiction film he's going to make. And I've seen some locations that I fell down in my chair. I called him shouting into the WhatsApp telephone that you should just turn on a camera, but it's there. The fiction film has all what he's interested in his two brilliant docs, those same preoccupations and empathy, but moral probing are there in this fiction film he's about to embark on. So I think it's just a question of who you are, and you just naturally go in those directions. You know?
Then we just repeat ourselves again and again and again.
Basically, yeah. I mean, yeah, you're making a similar. I was working on a script this morning, and I was like, oh, that's like whatever film I'd already. Yeah, I was like, oh, that's kind of like that thing in Goodbye Solo. But it's just good. I mean, Goodfellas is not that far away from Mean Streets in the end. They're both kind of a docu look at Italian American, New York crime. Or they're very similar. It's just a different way of shooting.
Well, and Josh, you're obviously Look of Silence and Act of Killing were, very directly related, and same, characters and milieu in certain ways. But as you head into this narrative feature, I'm curious how you think about these questions of thematic consistency in your work, and especially as you begin to work on something that I'm sure brings some new kinds of challenges in terms of the way that you tell a story.
The theme of guilt and how do we lie to ourselves? What stories do we tell ourselves so we can live with regret? And how do those, so that we can run away from regret, deny our past? How does that denial of one's past hollow one out and hollow out one's relationships and cause destructive, just all sorts of destructive behavior? That's I feel like making the act of killing in particular is a deep well from which to draw insight into those themes as I write these characters. And then some of the fiction scenes in the act of killing kind of, and I think offer kind of like a kind of almost like a prismatic look, or like it's like shining light through a prism, and you see different strains of sort of the interiority of Anwar Congo. And I think the musical numbers in the end, the film I'm working on now, are similar. Music, of course, in a good musical, I'm not saying this will be one, but in a good musical, music allows us to feel fully and exactly what a character is feeling. That's such a potent force medium to work with, and it's dangerous, and therefore because you're fully opening up the interiority of the character and relying on musical dissonance and lack of resolution to keep subtext alive, to prevent everything from just being one-to-one and flat. And I think working with that is very similar to somehow how I work with the dramatizations in the act of killing, especially as that becomes kind of a fever dream second half and not so expositorily present. But I think I really see a through line as I watch, of course, all of Ramin's films that he's made, but here too, and also in even the kind of aspirations of that plastic bag, like it's even in some of the books you recommend me. I mean, I'm reading a book you gave me when I last saw you now, and you just really see, it's a beautiful thing to feel a friend deeply through their work, unfolding for you through their work.
Everything we've been talking about in terms of the work that you've made of late has unfolded against this completely unprecedented backdrop for creativity, the strangeness of the world that we've been living in. And the fact that you work in a medium that requires collaboration means that something must have changed. So I would love to hear, Ramin, first from you about how you've kept sort of the creative spirit alive during these times, given that, there are certain things that in terms of how you gather and how you work with people that you just can't do in the way that you may have adapted to doing them.
I mean, in some ways it stayed the same because there's certain elements of an artist's life that is, involves isolation. So that remained the same, but I think other parts did change. The editing of White Tiger was the first time I made a movie, and I couldn't really sit with 3-4 people and watch them watch the movie, which is one of the most informative things you can do in an edit room, is watch people watch the film, because you can see where they're confused, you can see where they're bored, you can see where they laugh, you can see where they're excited, they're tense, and it allows you to be reinvigorated by your own film, which by now you become very bored with if you're just staring at it for months on end. So that process wasn't there for White Tiger or for Second Chance. You're just sending links to people. And then you're like with Joshua, then you're getting on a 3-hour Zoom or a WhatsApp phone call, which is still helpful, but you're missing that energy of watching. And that I found difficult. And for something that I'm writing, a fictional piece, I'm writing an original story, not an adaptation, then, all my research has been done by the telephone. And, pre-COVID, I mean, now, yes, I don't have a problem going triple vax and all that. But let's say months ago, before things calmed down for a while, you would have gone out and met the people, and you would have spent, days with them. You would have walked with them. You would have had lunch with them. It would have been focused like a phone call, but it would have had the kind of leisurely pace of just spending a day with someone where you're watching them do other things that have nothing to do with the phone call, like field a phone call from their spouse or talk to a stranger or whatever. How do they order food when you go to a deli to get lunch or whatever? So that part is missing in ways that is not as good for the life and work. Yeah.
I would just say, I would build on what Ramin said about isolation. I was fortunate that the first wave of lockdowns happened when I was embarking on a script rewrite and composing or writing the lyrics with the composer for the score for the musical for the end. And that I was able somehow to really do in isolation. It was very strange. I worked with this amazing composer who feels like a blood brother to me now. And but we only met once when he came to sort of audition for the job. And then we couldn't meet again. We wrote the whole score remotely. And I've actually only been in person with him once. He's now orchestrating. So that's really strange. I had 2 documentaries that I was developing, one in Greenland and one in Japan. Both are places that really locked down and excluded visitors. So those just were put on hold, which in a sense allowed me to just refocus to the musical. The end, of course, is about a family that the last human family in a bunker, a palatial bunker, a couple decades after the world has come down. And there's a kind of anthem in the song, or a threnody in the song, which we wrote before. I'd written the lyrics before the pandemic began, or I'd sketched the lyrics. It's once the world was full of strangers, we kept our distance, so many dangers, we trusted no one. And it just that the whole film, as evidenced by those lyrics, just took on such a weird resonance. Sometimes I think good for the film, sometimes bad, maybe. Ultimately, I think good, because we all understand what it's like to be isolated and the choices that go into making that. So that was a kind of surreal layer where, life imitates art. Not that the pandemic was just an imitation of my crummy little art, but yes.
Hopefully it doesn't get that bad.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not.
Joshua, I would like for there to be, as in Second Chance, I would like for Richard's frozen head to be on a robot torso wandering around your set.
Well, I'm so excited for the film. I'm so glad that that it's finding an audience now. You've made just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful documentary, and you are humble and full of self-doubt, Ramin. So I was telling you that as you were finishing it up, and you're like, I don't know, yeah, let's see. And this is a great film. So,
thank you for all the time you spent. All the time you spent watching it and talking to me about the edit.
It's an honor, and thank you for doing the same for my work. That's also nothing could be more valuable.
Well, fellas, it's been great hearing from both of you on this. I can't wait to see how the movie plays for Sundance. I mean, it's in all 50 states, so the silver lining in all this is a lot of people can watch this movie in the next couple of days. So
yeah,
watch it. Thank you so much, guys.